Thanks. My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome back, everyone. Uh, Gesticulate at your ears if you can't hear me at any point. Right. So, concept 9. I'm going to read the World Service long form. Good service leaders, together with sound and appropriate methods of choosing them, are at all levels indispensable for our future functioning and safety. The primary world service leadership once exercised by the founders of AA must necessarily be assumed by the trustees of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to cover some basic principles. Um, I've got a few examples of where this goes wrong. One of the difficulties with talking about the concepts is when things go well and people are abiding by the concepts, there's not much of a story, there's not much of an anecdote, there's nothing to tell. So, well, everything went very well, it was very nice, thank you. So, unfortunately, the only illustrative stories are where it goes wrong, and one is at terrible risk of libeling people or slandering people or appearing to badmouth them. Now, that's not my intention at all. So one tries to anonymize these situations as far as possible. And it's not to blame the person or to condemn them. It's simply to illustrate what works and what doesn't work. So please take the examples in that spirit. Um, it's not intended to gloat or anything. So the first basic principle is that AA servants. We use the term servant in AA. Rather like it. People seem to like the term servant, but it's misleading because if you've got a servant, we don't have servants here. We have to do everything ourselves. But if you have a servant and you tell the servant to clean the cooker, the servant cleans the cooker. There you go. Yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. That's what servants do. And sometimes people take this understanding from the general language of the word servant and apply it to AA and think that the servants are somehow skivvies, and they're not. Servants are thinking beings who are given a job to do. You give them the job in general. You tell them what outcome you want, what output, what deliverable, and they get to decide how they do it, provided that it produces the output that you want. And also, the brief given to servants in AA is often very vague. It might be, produce a new pamphlet for atheists and agnostics in AA. That's the brief. There we go. Let's say reflecting the experience of atheists and agnostics in AA. It doesn't necessarily tell you what to put in it. It may say extract information from existing AA literature, but it doesn't say which. It doesn't say what order to put things in. It doesn't say what tone to give it. So you give people a job, but then they intelligently carry it out. And there's a balance here. I'm afraid one needs a bit of judgment to apply this. It's not black and white, and it's not always clear. Um, Sometimes people complain. I've seen a situation in a group. I'm just looking at the participants, see if the person is here. No, they're not. I can say it. Um, you see, it's difficult. This, yeah. How can you can't tell a story. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. But there we go. So there was a situation where I've told this story before, but I think it's very helpful. The secretary of a group, part of their job was to distribute a uh, a contacts list of all of the serving members of the group. And a new incumbent in this role started to refuse to do this. So, well, what do you want it for? Why do you want this list? And then it was finally extracted from the person. And rather than being a nice, neat list which prints on one page or shows on one screen of a WhatsApp. It was a sort of a 12-page PDF with two numbers on each page, and it was just a disaster. You can't. It's not usable. I mean, technically, it's got the information, but it wasn't usable. And the person complained that the secretary complained that people were interfering in the job. And it's not interfering. If you're not delivering what the people who asked you to do a job, what they commissioned you to do, then it's absolutely right for them to complain about it. If a group asks a secretary to get chairs to speak, people to speak, who are over 5 years sober, have done the steps, and are capable of talking about the step in question, if it's a step meeting, it's quite right for the group to say something. If the person just gets their own friends who are 6 months sober and just get who spend the 15 minutes just getting everyone up to date on what's happened this week. But the converse is true as well. To the extent that you don't ask someone what to do, to the extent that you leave it to them to decide what to do in the role. For instance, a group doesn't stipulate how the treasurer keeps the money, in a box or under the mattress or in their own bank account or in a separate bank account. You can't complain when they exercise their judgment if you've selected the person well. So you've selected someone who you believe is trustworthy, then you have to trust them. If you can't trust them, well, you're the dummy that elected them. Stop electing people you don't trust. It's no good electing someone you don't trust and then micromanaging them because you don't trust them. So there's a balance here, and so there's a link here between concepts 3 and 9. So but the general rule, if you want to know where the line is, whoever puts you in a role, whether it's a group or an intergroup or whatever, they absolutely must tell you what the output is, what the deliverables are, and when they're deliverable. They may stipulate to some extent how you do that, and then everything else falls within your right of decision. And what concept 9 is a way of expanding a little bit on that right of decision. What qualities do you show when when exercising your right of decision? So one way to view there's a distinction at each level of delegation in the concepts between the decision made at a particular level and the implementation at the level below. And so conference makes final decisions on large matters of general policy and finance, and then the board implements that. And so the decisions made are general frameworks. They're not blow-by-blow accounts of what should be done. They're general frameworks. And then within that general framework, the implementing level, the executive level, exercises this right of decision and the qualities of leadership. Now, what we've talked before about this phrase, chief initiative and active responsibility. So the board, which is an implementing body in AA, has this chief initiative and active responsibility. And leadership is really a single word for those two qualities of chief initiative and active responsibility. I'm not in the service structure at the moment. I've rotated out. You have to let the land lie fallow for a while periodically, and lick your wounds amongst other things, for a couple of years before they'll let you back. Don't go straight back into a role, or you'll act out all the frustrations from the previous role in the next role. So it's a good idea to have a break and go in the corner and count yourself. But over the last 27, 28 years in AA, I first went to an intergroup, I don't know, 1995, so 20, maybe 94, so 25, 26 years ago. So I've observed a lot, and I pretty constantly. There was a couple of years when I didn't do much in general service between 8 and 10. Well, didn't do anything, in fact. Um, I was otherwise engaged, shall we say, indisposed for a couple of years. Didn't drink, but I did some other things. But anyway, that's another talk. Um, I've observed a lot in service. I'm sure you have too. Have you ever been at an intergroup meeting or similar, where all the officers report nothing to report, where all the vacancies are filled, and everyone's very happy? Oh, look, we've got all the vacancies filled, and no one's doing anything, but we thank them very warmly for their report that they've done nothing. And one of the fig leaves for this is you tell the intergroup all the things you're planning to do. And it makes it look as though you've done something and you haven't. And then the next time you explain very carefully why you haven't done anything, but you explain all of the wonderful things that you were going to do. Um, uh, and there's this sort of sense sometimes that everything happens in God's time. Um, and the understanding within AA is God's time is some indefinite point in the future, and easy does it. So don't worry about it. In God's time, it will happen. In God's time never seems to be today. Have you noticed that? Um, there's a story. It's one of my favourite stories about a rabbi who goes to a tailor to get his coat mended, and uh, the rabbi says to the tailor, I'm sorry, those of you who've heard this, but rabbi goes to the tailor and says, when will the coat be ready? And the tailor says, God willing, it will be ready tomorrow. Rabbi turns up, coat's not mended. So, when will it be ready? And the tailor says, God willing, it will be ready tomorrow. Third time, rabbi shows up, coat's still not mended. He's getting impatient now. He says, so, when will this coat be ready? The tailor says, God willing, it will be ready tomorrow. And the rabbi says, and if we leave God out of it? Um, it's very good. Similarly, there's a parallel story where someone is walking past a monastery garden and there's a monk there working very hard at the garden. And the passerby wants to ingratiate himself with the monk. So he says, look at this manifestation of God's glory and bounty in this wonderful garden. And the monk says, yes, isn't it just? You should have seen it when he had it to himself. So this chief initiative and active responsibility, which is leadership, it means that when you're given a role in the AA structure, instead of just being reactive, so responding to incoming inquiries, you go and create opportunities for public information. You go and talk to doctors and professionals and the local authority and charities saying, hey, here's some information about AA. If your staff would appreciate a talk, we can send people in free of charge, tell you all about AA. And I've seen situations where there's one person being proactive in a service role and not working full time, just being reasonably proactive, maybe doing an hour or two's work a week for the 2 months, just a few, not even a whole day, maybe a couple of hours a week for 2 months, and their report contains maybe 10 times as much as all of the other reports put together. Um, if you want to perform well, AA is a very good place to do it. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, because if you do anything at all, you're going to stand out, in my experience, from the array. At region, it's a lot better. By the time you get to region, the people that tend to get elected at region tend to be doers. It's intergroup, which is often a catastrophe. So the ideal when one takes on a role is to give it, if you give it the time, if you set aside I would set aside 2 or 3 hours, say on a Sunday morning, to do all the letters, to do all the planning, to do uh, and you can send out 15, 20 emails on a Sunday morning. You do that, and the role takes care of itself. Um, let's have a look at what else we've got. Yeah, so a leader in AA is someone who, when you give them a job, they exercise chief initiative and active responsibility. They don't sit there like potatoes waiting for things to happen. They grab hold of the role and do something with it. And this isn't just people in very obvious positions of authority. The tea person can show leadership by getting a recycling bag and doing recycling without anyone asking them to do it. You can exercise initiative. You can have initiative in any role in AA. And it's not. I personally, I think it's an absolute joy when you see people at your home group exercising initiative. And woe betide any group members that start to snipe from the sidelines just because something small has changed and they didn't authorize it. As the you let people express themselves in the role. Everyone will do the role differently. Um, can you hold one moment? Sorry about that. Both of us are in a meeting, and there was an urgent call at the door. Thank you for your patience. Um, Now it says in this little blurb on the concept that leaders must be good. We've got to have good leaders, and good is a difficult word. There's a difference between a good book and the good book. There's a difference between good in the good book and for a good time call and then a telephone number. Good can mean lots of different things. So what does good mean when you're talking about a leader? Well, I'll have to go into hiding after doing these for the things that I'm saying. Uh, I've often seen the view expressed that a good person for a role in AA is the person who's available. If they're available, that's good. Now, we're not saying availability is a bad thing. In fact, availability is a good thing. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So just because someone is available doesn't mean they're suited to the role. Not everyone is suitable for every job, and I'm going to be very naughty in saying this. Sometimes I've seen the view expressed that conference delegates can learn the job on the job. So if they don't know anything about the concept, who cares? Just go along. And we just won't do. The service is not for the individual to teach them a nice little lesson about life. It's for beneficiaries. And I think the people that benefit, so the fellowship as a whole, and the still suffering alcoholics, I think they deserve people who've done their fudging homework. So it's no good if you're a conference delegate. I believe this is a personal view. So, well, I'll learn it on the job. Well, between the time that you're elected and going up to conference, you could study the traditions and the concepts. You could read all of the books in question. You could find someone to guide you through it. If you struggle with reading stuff, a lot of people struggle with reading stuff. Fine, but you find someone that can help you. There is no excuse for learning something on the job, as it were, and letting the first year of an assignment go by in a blur because you have no idea what's going on, but you're enjoying the atmosphere of the room, which is another view that I've heard. Um, uh, you're only in a role for 2 years, sometimes 3. And so you need to hit the ground running. And maybe you've got a couple of months, the first couple of months you're going to be learning a lot on the job, but there's an awful lot that can be learned in advance. If it can be learned in advance, learn it in advance. Um, I was at a concepts meeting a while ago where there were people saying, "Well, I don't know anything about the concepts and blah blah blah." I've never been shown. Well, if you can read, the books are there. When the information is not hidden, it's not secret. Um, when I didn't know about it, the reason I didn't know about it was because I wasn't exercising chief initiative and active responsibility for finding out about it. One of the extraordinary things I've heard as a complaint, it's a regular complaint against the board. Um, and I'll always defend the board hugely when it gets accused of people saying we weren't told. We're not we're not told where the cat's coming now. We weren't told we're not told how the fellowship spends its money. We're not told this, we're not told that. Well, you are. If you register your group with York, you'll be sent the annual accounts, the board reports, all of these other things. You'll be sent them automatically. The information is, if you're not sent stuff, very often the information is totally available on the AA website if someone takes the trouble to learn. So actually, these qualities of chief initiative and active responsibility, I think, this is just a view, I think that duty resides with everyone in AA to take to take the role of custodial oversight as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. It's all no. Sorry, just give me a moment. I need to get some cat food to get the cat out of somewhere dangerous. Just give me 1 moment. Oh, jamais 203. It's going to happen a third time. Something else is going to happen. So, where were we? Um, so the roles need people to hit the ground running, and I think AA deserves people who equip themselves to be the best possible servants in any role. And sometimes the view is expressed that by stipulating requirements for particular jobs, we're somehow excluding people from doing service in AA, and we're absolutely not. I think there's nothing in the literature that suggests that everybody should do every job in AA, that everyone is perfectly equipped to do every job in AA. If you're terrible with money, if you've got sticky fingers, if you can't count, if you're hopelessly disorganized, if you can't write a report and you have a phobia of banks, you're probably not best placed to be the group's treasurer. But there's going to be a gazillion other things you do. So we don't exclude people from service in general, but what we do is we say it's in the best interests of the group or the whatever, the intergroup, the region, to have the best person for the job. And, those skills can be acquired over a time you acquire new experience. But there's nothing wrong with saying that jobs have certain requirements, that to be the secretary of the intergroup, you kind of need a computer and you need to be able to use it. You need to be able to produce documents. You need to be able to present information. You need to be able to use email, and you need to have the time and the availability to be able to respond to incoming inquiries within 24 hours. There's nothing worse, for instance, than having a secretary of an intergroup whose turnaround time for correspondence is somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks because nothing can get done in between intergroups when that's the case. So in my view, part of concept 9, it talks about getting people who are the right people for the job. You've got to know what the job requires. And it talks about the sound and appropriate ways of choosing people. So a good practice I've seen adopted at intergroups, and London's pretty good at it, getting pretty good at this most of the time. You advertise the role in advance. You make sure that the requirements of the role, including any special skills and level of commitment, are clear. You get people to submit service CVs. You have them present their service history. At the intergroup meeting where they're elected, you have them answer questions about their experience, including application of the traditions and the concepts. You have an election, and you be prepared to have no one in the role rather than have someone unsuitable or qualified. So you have an election, even if there's only one person, and you have to stomach the fact that, when they come back in the room after the ballot, you're going to say, I'm sorry, you didn't get the job. This is still vacant. Talks about these objectives of future functioning and safety of Alcoholics Anonymous. My observation, when public information or health liaison or armed services liaison, armed services was my main area when I did it for about 8 years. If you do the job well and you keep good records and you do a good handover, let me just block the door. Barricading against the barbarian hordes. I know what Rome felt like in the 4th and 5th centuries now, except we've got better plumbing. Anyway, if you do the job well and you hand over, the next person starts the job at a much higher level. They've got all of the material available. There is a curious phenomenon, however, and I'm sure this has got a psychological origin. Oh, no. Um, I've seen situations where the gods are against me today. I've seen a situation where someone comes into a role and they are given an extraordinarily comprehensive handover in terms of details of all the work that's been done, templates, guidelines on how to do things, and they spend 2 years in the role saying, well, no one handed over to me, I haven't got any information, I don't know what to do, and they spend the 2 years of the role reinventing the wheel, not doing anything, and leaving the role in exactly the position they found it in. And a curious thing, in Armed Services Liaison, I was the regional officer, and then I was on the national subcommittee, and our job was supporting the dozens of intergroup and region armed services liaison officers. And we supported them in all sorts of ways. We gave them initially, years ago, it was a CD-ROM with lots of documents and presentation, template presentations and videos and materials and draft letters and template letters, all this stuff. By the time we 4 or 5 years moved on, and I was on the national subcommittee, and we were providing everything on the website. So there was a special section of the website where they could download, including a document saying, you're an incoming intergroup armed services liaison officer. What do you do? And there was like 20 things you can do to get up and running, where all the resources are, blah, blah, blah. And then once a year, you'd have a meeting either with all of the regional ones or the regional ones and the intergroup ones. And person after person would be saying, I didn't know where to start. I didn't know where to get the information. And the truth is, I've got the email records where they asked us for information. We gave it to them on the email. It said, if you have any other questions, please ask. We're totally available. As I said, I think it's got a psychological origin to it. But anyway, the best practice is to be willing to learn from the people that did the role before you. And it seems to be a rare skill. I think people don't like the idea that they didn't invent it themselves. It's the old authority problem. But if you have a chain where each person is willing to actively learn from the one before, then you go up a level each time rather than being back at square one each time. And that's what ensures the future functioning and safety. The second thing is uh, making sure that that collective memory is recorded of what works, of what doesn't work, of who's been contacted, how they've been contacted, um, templates, presentations, all of those things. So future functioning and safety, the safety side of things, I've seen situations where things go wrong and you've got a bit of a loose cannon in a particular role who is in danger of damaging our relations with outside organizations, and just quietly and swiftly encourage them to resign if there's real trouble, and say, sweetheart, I know you're trying very hard, but this is really not working. And if you don't resign, I'm afraid there probably will be um, uh, a motion of no confidence at the next intergroup or region meeting. Now, you're quite at liberty to defend that, and you may well win. But if you want to avoid that, one way of doing that is to resign now. It doesn't do that lightly, but situations where where basically you've got someone acting crazily in communications with outside agencies, for instance, being very accusatory towards doctors or psychiatrists, and complaints come in about their behavior, that kind of thing. People starting arguments with the local treatment centres. So you've got to be very careful who you get in these, particularly the outward facing roles. There's a certain amount of damage that can be done internally, but the damage that can be done externally is huge, because there's no ongoing relationship with the person, let's say the doctor or the local health authority with whom you've mucked up the relationship. There's almost no way of addressing that until all the people have moved on. So there are some further points made by the essay. It talks about this ever present question of leadership. And it says that the structure of AA has been established largely once and for all, but leadership cannot be established in that way, as the sermons are constantly rotating. So unfortunately, this is a bit of a constant thorn in one's side. How are you going to make sure that the baton is passed? And one of the questions which arises in this connection is when you've got a group which is running very well, or an intergroup or a region which is running very well, and lots of people are on the verge of rotating out. Now, I think a balance has to be struck between doing what you can to ensure the baton is passed properly, but without controlling the outcome. And the best way of doing that is to advertise roles very widely and encourage anyone who's interested to express the interest, to come along, to stand, to do all of that. But there's nothing wrong with actively going to particular people and saying, hey, have you considered this role? So that at least you've maybe got 2 or 3 safe pairs of hands going for the role amongst a larger field. And getting people to think about that well in advance. Part of leadership is ensuring that the next generation you're passing the baton to, you have an active relationship with them. You're actively thinking about the future safety and functioning of the role that you're currently discharging. We mentioned before that it's my personal view that we're all leaders in different ways in AA. We all get to exercise chief initiative and active responsibility. But specifically, it talks in the essay about the GSRs, the area committee members, UK equivalent or GB equivalent is the intergroup and regional representatives, delegates and board members. Now, the reason why it's important at all of these levels is each layer elects the layer below. So the GSRs in Great Britain elect the intergroup officers, they elect the regional officers, Um, um, they elect the delegates. The regions propose people for the board. So if you have GSRs who don't know what they're doing, who don't understand the concepts, who don't understand the importance of getting the right person for the job, you won't get the right person for the job. So the GSRs are absolutely key to this, because if you've got the right GSRs in place, you'll get good decision making trickling down through the system. What it talks about uh, in the essay as well is selecting the right person for the job, and the question to ask is, who is best qualified? And it says to cast aside personal ambitions, that's either on one's own account or someone else's account, feuds, controversies, and a particular question whether or not it will benefit the individual. So I've seen the argument proposed that it would be good for Susan or Bobby to do the tea at the home group, or to open up the meeting at the beginning. Yeah, but is it good for the group, for Susan or Bobby, who are 18 seconds sober, to be given the keys? Or I'm sure if you've ever had an unreliable tea maker at a large meeting, the chaos that ensues if the tea person isn't there on time, no one knows who's bringing the milk. No. No. It's for her own good, may I add. No. One moment. Can I get one of you to sit against the door? I think that's the only way this is going to work. She's a very powerful little creature, and she knows exactly when to cause trouble. Um, so it's not about, if it benefits the individual, that's great. But as I said earlier, that's not the point of the service. It also talks in the essay about the third legacy procedure, which means that you hold a vote with all of the candidates, you whittle them down. By every time there's a vote, you remove the worst scoring person, and you keep doing that until someone gets 2/3. If you get down to two people and you still don't have 2/3, then you put the names in a hat and draw one. If you've got a tie for second place, all the people tied for second place go into the hat as well. Bill asserts that this method of selection reduces a lot of tension and reduces friction in the losing camp. My experience is I've never seen that the case. I've only seen that last element cause controversy. And consternation. People remember it years later. I've never seen a situation where this is not applied. I mean, the third legacy procedure is great as far as I'm concerned, down to that last element of the drawing by lot. When I've seen people simply go with the majority of, 55 against 45 for an election, that's never remembered years later, the fact they went with the 55. When they draw it by lot and the person that got 40% wins, that's still talked about. Everyone remembers who it was years later. So the theory is different from the practice, maybe because the British are just more awkward and difficult, and I don't know, less forgiving. It wouldn't surprise me at all. So Bill wrote this essay on leadership, which was published in the Grapevine, and then was replicated in the World Service Manual in the section on the concepts. And he talks about these qualities required by leaders, and it's really a very good list that one can use oneself. I'll talk about that later, in terms of, well, these are the skills, these are the qualities that I need to try and demonstrate in service. The first one is dedication, and I break that down into being hardworking and diligent, which means I front load the work. If I've got 3 months to do something, I still do it today, not one day before the 3-month deadline. dotting the I's and crossing the T's, taking each action as though it really, really matters, presenting documents as you would if it were your CV, as you would if you were doing an important report at work. Just because it's for AA doesn't mean that you just don't care, you don't proofread it, you don't lay it out properly, you don't do a spell check. No, do it as you would for let's say you had an in-tray exercise as part of a job application process, and your job was to produce a document. You'd make damn sure that it was perfect in every way. And to apply that within AA as well, it's a joy when you see people making the effort when maybe it doesn't matter so much, but treating everything as though it matters. And there's a relevant quotation on that. Um, I trouble you with who they were, but Ernst Scheneck said about Karl Kraus, this is a quotation from the 1930s, at a time when people were generally decrying the Japanese bombardment of Shanghai, I met Karl Kraus philosopher. I met Karl Kraus struggling over one of his famous comma problems. He said something like, I know that everything is futile when the house is burning, but I have to do this as long as it is at all possible. For if those who are supposed to look after the commas had always made sure they were in the right place, Shanghai wouldn't be burning. And I think that's a very good principle. If everybody was doing their absolute best, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, working hard when no one was looking, things in all sorts of scenarios, all sorts of domains would be radically different. There's if you know anything about risk management, there's something called the Swiss cheese model. Has anyone heard of the Swiss cheese model? Okay, so let's say you're talking about maritime safety, so the safety on board a vessel. And let's say you're talking about navigational safety. There might be 7 layers, 7 safety barriers between safety and catastrophe. And those 7 barriers, well, you're fine. You've got 7 barriers in between. What are the chances that all 7 are going to be breached? But the fact is, in most scenarios, each of those layers is like a slice of Swiss cheese with holes in it. So actually, even if you've got loads of barriers between you and complete catastrophe, if each one is compromised a little bit, the danger can slip through all 7 layers pretty easily. So this idea that you treat everything as though the buck stops with you, and this is an important quality of leadership. The buck stops with you, even if there are further bucks down the line. You treat the buck as stopping with you. You don't rely on there being someone else behind you who's going to catch it if you drop it. So that's dedication. It also talks now. This suggest this at your home group. So put the cat amongst the feathers, that the qualities required for service in AA are stability and emotional maturity. There we go. And some examples of that as they're set out in the essay. It talks about being balanced, so not being easily upset or ruffled. Being responsible, so you actively manage processes to ensure that the results are achieved. Non-partisan, you're acting on behalf of the whole fellowship rather than fighting a particular corner. Being fair and detached, which means that you're willing to submit to the best idea wherever it's coming from. Not opposing good ideas out of spite or resentment. Being able to see past the individual to the merits of the argument, so recognizing that hot-tempered people are sometimes right. Hot-tempered is a polite word, but sometimes the angriest person in the room is also right. And sometimes the calm, love and tolerance person is dead wrong. So just because someone is nice doesn't mean they're right. Just because someone is doesn't mean they're wrong. You look at this is principles before personalities. Able to handle destructive critics. So it's great to read the essay on that, because it's a great life skill to be able to handle destructive criticism. If you sponsor a lot, 1 in X is going to turn on you. It's just the law. People get stuff in their head, and you get stuff wrong, it gets bloody whatever. But you sift the evidence presented for truth, and you learn from it. So even the harshest and most destructive critics, there's something in there. At some point, I made a decision which placed me in a position later to be heard. With destructive critics, to attempt dialogue, but don't flog a dead horse. If they won't budge, let it go. Don't repeat yourself. If you say it more than once, you're nagging. And to exercise tolerance. He also talks about vision, which means assessing possible future scenarios in a rational and reasonable way, looking out for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Constructively using foresight and prudence. So it's not fear to look into the future and look for possible problems. Fear it's coming from an emotional attachment, a negative emotional attachment to a future event. Foresight and prudence actually require fearlessness. If you're too frightened, you won't look, because you're too frightened to look. So actually, foresight and prudence work against that. They're not associated with fear. They're almost the inverse of it. And also the active exercise of vision. So taking an idea, working through all of the options, working through all the scenarios, considering all of the factors which could impact your plan, looking for pros and cons and ways of mitigating those, looking at the long term, not just the short term, and attaching greater weighting to the long term outcomes. Is that wonderful Native American notion of you consider the impact on the 7 upcoming generations. So, it's not just the midterms. Let's look 7 generations ahead. You'll get a totally different answer on what the right thing to do is. There was a Dutch naval commander in I think the 17th century. I'm not very good at Anglo-Dutch naval battles and when they happened. But there's a chap called Michel de Ruyter, Ruyter, who kept defeating the British. They couldn't work out how he was doing it. I think we're still wondering today, but the Dutch know. And what he would do, he'd basically think of every single thing that can go wrong. And he'd do live simulation. He'd do simulations with the entire fleet, like pretending that the scenario is happening, so that when like fog descended in the middle of a battle, his entire fleet already knew how to do it because they'd run the simulation. And the British were not doing this. They were doing something. They were probably drunk, whereas the Dutch, famously abstemious, adopting an entirely different approach. And that's vision. That's vision. A little bit neurotic, but it works. What else does he talk about? He talks about flexibility. And this wonderful phrase, progress is usually made through a series of improving compromises. He talks about leading through example. So you lead by example by demonstrating the qualities that you're banging on about. You try to be that thing yourself, and then people want to imitate you. Is the ideal, as opposed to, and he gives the two opposite, the two extremes we're to avoid, which is being a power driver or a meek order taker. And also special skills. I think the General Service Board in this country does a very good job about making sure that when they're looking at potential new board members, they're looking at where the skills gaps are and going for people who've got skills which match the gaps on the board. I think that's a wonderful way of doing things. So I'm slightly running out of time. I've got a lot more material. Let's see what we've got. What's important? Statesman versus politico. By the way, to be a statesman is good according to Bill. To be a politico is bad. And politicos are people that do what the crowd wants in order to please them rather than what is right. Whereas the statesman will do what is for the good of all and is able to stand up to a hasty or ill-informed majority. So I've got a few minutes on applying concept 9 in my life. I apply it at work. In my industry, there isn't such a thing as a standard brief. All of the agencies which give me work brief it in a different way. They construct and design the projects in very different ways. And if it's a bad idea, if I think it's unprofessional or unethical, I push back. I'm not just an order taker. I'm not just looking after my pocket. I could just say yes to a whole load of things for the money, but I don't. If I think it's wrong, I'll say so. And they usually appreciate it, not always. Some agencies just are not good at you being something more than an order taker. But I find that working relationships work best when the delegating authority accepts me as a leader as opposed to an order taker, someone who's got a professional skill which is of value rather than simply the skivvy to be pushed around. And the organizations which work with you like that are I find much easier to work with in all sorts of other ways as well. So discharging responsibilities in my life. I've mentioned this 1,000 times before, but step 3 is not about handing it over to God and just waiting for things to happen. I've got to actively manage. And sometimes people say, my life isn't manageable today. Nowhere in the big book does it say that our lives become manageable. Do you have a pension? Do you pay your mortgage? Do you mend do you mend the gutter problem as soon as it starts, or do you wait till you've got flooding and dry rot in your house? Lots of things in life need managing. It doesn't mean that God doesn't have final responsibility and ultimate authority, but the point is that responsibility and authority is delegated to me to exercise chief initiative and active responsibility in. So I'm super proactive about managing the different areas of my life, but I take the action and then I let go. Take the action and let go when I'm in my right mind. Sometimes I don't, and I carry all my responsibilities around me like eggs in one of those French wicker baskets, and then it's terrifying. So to treat all of this at arm's length, not to be frightened to make big decisions in the management of my life. As Tom says, the worst thing it can be is a terrible mistake. If it's a terrible mistake, admit it promptly. Statesman versus politico. Spiritual Paul, who died a few years ago now, said, "You don't want to be a people pleaser. You want to be a God pleaser. There's only one of him." And that certainly makes life a lot easier. So doing what is right. I mean, you don't want to, pardon my French, piss people off more than is strictly necessary. So, sometimes people use that in order to, that thing from sometimes they say in Texas, I care more about whether you live or die than about your feelings. So I'm going to say terrible things. Someone from, I think there's someone from Colorado here. Someone from Colorado once said that it's like nurses who give injections. The best nurses are the ones who give the kid the injection without the kid. It's over before the kid realizes what's happened. There's always a way of delivering truth in a way which minimizes, which makes the message go in. If you cause pain, they're not going to come back. They're going to remember the pain. They won't remember the message. But this statesmanship means that one has to be willing to stand alone against a majority or plough an unusual or unpopular furrow in life. If that's the path you're given to walk down, you have to walk down it. So personal qualities in life that which are suggested by concept 9: being hardworking, attention to detail, emotionally balanced, unbiased, flexible, and tolerant. Those are my objectives for this morning, at any rate. Um, Sound methods of choosing. That's one of the catchphrases in concept 9. Sound methods of choosing. So with the boot on the other foot, I'm looking at uh, am I qualified? Am I the right person when someone asks me to do something? Sometimes people say never say no to an AA request. I would say never say no to a reasonable AA request. Just because I'm being asked does not make me qualified. I'm not qualified by the asking. Tom also says, have the grace to know when you're out of your depth. If someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer, practice in front of the mirror saying 100% don't know. Write that on a little post-it note, memorize it so that when someone asks you a question you don't know the answer to, you say 100% don't know, and then you go and throw up because you're powerless. Like you feel physically sick refusing to give someone an answer when you spent your whole life giving people answers to questions you know nothing about. Uh, but, but, sometimes the people who are asking you to do a job know more about the job than you do, and they might be pretty good judges of character. I know that when I used to recruit a lot in finance, and we knew what the jobs that we were recruiting for required. We knew very clearly. And honestly, we kind of knew within 90 seconds of the person walking in the room whether they'd do it or not. Occasionally, we overrode that because of a good performance in the interview. And the one time we did, actually, one time we did that, boy, did we regret it. Our initial instinct had been right. The one time we didn't go against our initial instinct, I still remember the awfulness of having to get rid of that chap. It was just, we shouldn't have taken him on in the first place. It was wrong. So I've been offered opportunities in my life which I think are way beyond what I'm capable of doing. But I trusted the people who are the experts in what the role was and went into it with the attitude, if it's a terrible mistake, I'll admit it promptly. Unlike, with one role in my work life, I'm still doing it 17 years later. So it worked. Couple of and the last point, future functioning and safety. There's a balance here between functioning and safety. If my focus is too much on getting things done, my life can sometimes drift off track. If my focus is on safety, I can become too neurotic and withdrawn from life. So there has to be a balance between getting involved but not jeopardizing the whole mission. We're coming up to an hour. Let's say I don't think we've got any. I don't think we've got any questions. So, oh, how how do we deal with branch stacking? What's branch stacking, Gabrielle? Okay, so um, yeah, so I would never ever um, yeah, don't do it. I mean, don't do it yourself. What can you do if you have a group where people are trying to do that, where people are trying to bring in all their pals to, um, I think a good practice against that, at group level, you can't really do it. You can only really do it at group level. You can't really do it at other levels because of voting authority, which is taken very seriously. But to have the principle at a group that the people who get to vote in group conscience meetings, which are the only meetings, you don't decide major things in business meetings, you decide major things in group conscience meetings. How often do you have those? Twice a year, unless there's an emergency, at a time and a place which is separate from the main meeting. advertised in advance only to service members, so people who are doing actual service at the group. If you do that, you can't bring a whole load of people on. It just can't be done. So with most problems in AA, if you follow the basic structure, um, as suggested by the traditions and the concepts, the problem sorts itself out. Um, Simple shortcuts can often create, like, oh, let's not worry about business meetings and group consciences. Let's just have them at, ad hoc whenever we want. Let's keep this simple. You're opening the door for having branch stacking. So anyway, I think that's the only question, and it's gone 11, so I better shut up there. So I'm going to shut up. Well, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week for concept 10.